Hello and welcome to session 12 of the Maximum Happiness course, The Power of the Mind. For 5,000 years, the wisest men and women of each civilization and generation have searched for the secrets of human potential. More progress has been made in uncovering the secret in the last 100 years than in all the centuries that went before it. The secret of all human potential in health, happiness, prosperity and fulfillment is to be found in the human mind. The workings of the human brain are truly remarkable. If our brain is the hardware, then our mind is the most incredible piece of software that you could ever imagine. They say a picture paints 1,000 words. The largest part of an iceberg is out of sight, underwater. Only 1/7 to 1/9 is actually visible above the surface. The largest ones tower as much as 400 feet above the surface of the ocean, with as much as 3,000 feet concealed beneath water level. So what has this to do with the mind, you may ask? Well, it's an excellent comparison with the levels of consciousness in our minds. Your conscious mind is represented by the visible element of the iceberg above the waterline. Your subconscious mind is represented by the much larger supportive part below the surface. But the largest part of our consciousness, as with the iceberg, lies outside of the known measurable area. The infinity of the sky and the space above the iceberg is representative of the area we know least about, the infinite intelligence of the superconscious mind. You have 3 minds. Technically speaking, each of us has only one mind, but this one mind has 3 parts to it: the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the superconscious mind. The first 2 minds are within us, but the superconscious mind is without, it's exterior. It is the mind of our extended self. Your conscious mind is the only part of your mind that thinks. That's why most people use their conscious mind power to solve problems and to achieve their goals. This is the mind of your 5 senses that enable you to consciously experience the physical world. The conscious mind is what we operate with during our daily activities and our waking hours. It represents only a small portion of our consciousness and awareness. However, the conscious mind power is limited when compared to the subconscious mind and the superconscious mind power. The most important conscious mind power is the power to decide. It has the power to decide what information to enter and be retained by your subconscious mind. But most people are not knowingly exercising this control. Instead, they let rubbish enter their subconscious mind. Garbage in, garbage out, as the expression goes. Your conscious mind also has the power to reprogram your subconscious mind, mainly through repetition. For instance, remember the first time you learnt to drive a car, when you had to consciously think of which pedal to step on and which gear to select. But now they've become automatic. You're able to do it subconsciously almost. Through repetition, you have programmed your subconscious mind. Once it is in your subconscious, it becomes automatic. And it's worth remembering that the subconscious mind can't tell the difference between something that's made up and something that is real. Whilst it's true for driving a car, it's also true for achieving success in life. Subconscious mind lies below the level of the conscious awareness. It records everything we do and everything we've ever done, everything we've ever tasted, felt, smelt, heard in our lives is there within our subconscious. Every activity we engage in, our thoughts about those activities, our likes and our dislikes, about what we encounter each day, they're all there, buried in our subconscious. Although nothing is forgotten by the subconscious mind, most of the time, this part of our consciousness remains hidden from our everyday awareness. However, the subconscious has a tremendous influence on how we think and act when in the conscious state. The hypnosis and relaxation help us to tap into this subconscious part of our mind to break bad habits, access outdated or negative beliefs, and safely reprogram them with an up-to-date functionality that is more relevant and healthy for our present day needs and requirements. Your subconscious mind is enormously powerful. When you use it properly, it can help you to more rapidly move towards the achievement of your goals and the desires than you ever dreamed possible. You can use your subconscious mind for creation or destruction, for good or for evil. You can be a prince or a pauper depending on the way that you operate it. To fulfill your potential, you must learn how to access it at will and use it for your purposes intelligently and constructively. We're often convinced that the only way to make money is to work longer hours or even harder at work. Eventually we learn that the belief that we can only improve our life by longer hours and harder work leads us down a blind alley. The answer is to work smarter, to use more of our mental powers than our physical powers to achieve our goals. Successful men and women are those who have learned to operate their conscious and their subconscious minds in harmony, enabling them to get the things that they want far faster and with much less effort. This discovery changes the focus of our efforts and the direction of our entire life. Your subconscious mind plays many different roles in your life. We can classify its functions into 5 distinct and different areas. Firstly, number 1, it maintains and balances the well-being of our body. That's why our body is self-healing in nature. It has the power to heal any form of diseases that you can think of. It's the fundamental of so-called alternative therapies. The second, number 2, it protects us and sometimes our loved ones from emergencies or dangers. Number 3, it is the mega memory bank. It stores all of our past experiences, as I mentioned earlier. Every one of our senses that we've experienced, smells, tastes, memories, things that we've seen, things that we've heard, they're all there within the subconscious mind. Number 4, it's like a magnet. It has the power to attract things that resonate with its beliefs. And 5, it's like radar. It sends and receives information to and from the superconscious mind. This is the function that we're going to discuss further in a moment. Your subconscious mind contains everything that you have ever received into your mind by the way of your senses. As I said, every smell, every taste, every feeling, everything you've ever felt, everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever done, everything you've heard and thought. It's like the biggest MP3 recorder recording all of your senses. There are some that even declare that your subconscious contains memories of sensations and experiences that occurred before you were born into this world. Under hypnosis, patients have been able to remember events and feelings from earliest childhood, memories that their conscious power of recall would not permit them to surface. And indeed, some patients have been able to recall things that apparently happened in a prior life. Instinct. Some of the decisions that we make, the thoughts that we have and the actions that we take are born partly or completely out of our instincts. While this remains an open book scientifically, scientists and psychologists appear to agree that instincts are formed from previous experiences, and that is certainly what I believe. and also from our memories, and from a third source, from instincts inherited from our predecessors, inside and outside of the family unit. Prior experiences and memories of similar circumstances combine to tell us if a particular action would be sensible or unwise. In that sense, instincts are a reliable tool for us in making decisions and for protecting us from harm. So, instinct includes behaviour that is inherited. How can behaviours be inherited like this? How exactly does a newly hatched spider weave a perfect web that is characteristic of his or her species without ever having seen such a web, let alone having been trained to spin one? How do butterflies know what to do? Why do dogs and cats behave as dogs and cats the way they do? Why do rabbits behave as they do? Instinct is one possible answer. People, especially psychologists, have long considered instinct to be an important and an accurate determinant of our behaviour. Let's talk about the superconscious mind then. We'll just touch on this for the moment. For many years we've accepted the principle of the conscious and the superconscious mind. However, this wasn't always the case. Prior to the human race arriving at this level of acceptance and understanding, the concept of the conscious and the subconscious activity within the brain was just simply too incredible for our less developed brains to consider, let alone accept as being feasible. Yet, they both now have their rightful place in neuroscience. Sigmund Freud used the term subconscious in 1893 to describe associations and impulses that are not accessible to consciousness. Before any new idea or concept is unanimously accepted and embraced, the nature of the human brain is to reject it out of hand as unlikely, improbable, or simply untrue. And that was how the conscious and the subconscious mind was treated generally prior to it being revealed as fact. 50 years before each life-changing new discovery or invention is revealed, the majority of us would not have thought them possible. It was simply beyond our level of comprehension. As you hear about the superconscious mind in this recording, please don't be surprised to feel doubt or even incredulity or to feel sceptical about the words that I'm saying. However, I would urge you to stick with it, because just to hear the views of many revered and exceptional individuals on the planet, both in current day and in history, on this very subject. If we'd been alive in the early 1900s, how many of us would have embraced the possibility of man landing on the moon? Or the existence of the internet, or all that's possible with computers now? Going back further, how remarkable would electricity have seemed to those who relied on the old gas lamps? Advances in technology have been so rapid over recent years that it's now possible for a surgeon, with the aid of computers and robotics, to perform an operation without actually being in the same country as the patient, let alone in the same room. Yet we now accept these spectacular advances in human achievement as routine. If more advances have been made in the last 100 years, the advances in the last 30 years have been truly phenomenal. This is the information and technology age, and the two combined have advanced human potential to a staggering level. Very little is now beyond the grasp of man. Many discoveries, inventions and achievements are as a result of commitment and dogged determination, improving or plagiarizing existing prototypes, and through what seems to be almost a process of natural development. Many discoveries, though, have their origins in a form of inspired infinite intelligence that, although cannot yet be explained to the satisfaction of man, nonetheless have their place in history. Napoleon Hill was one of the most committed researchers in the field of human development. In the early part of the 20th century, he spent 20 years of his life tracking down and conducting in-depth interviews of 504 of the most successful people in the world. He was commissioned to do this by Andrew Carnegie, who pioneered the American steel industry and was later responsible for the emergence of the lending libraries. Andrew Carnegie wanted Napoleon Hill to discover what traits were shared by each of these men and women. What common factors did each possess that could be collectively responsible for so much success, happiness and fulfillment? Among the people that Hill researched were Henry Ford, who brought the motor car to the masses; Thomas Edison, who was responsible for thousands of patented inventions, including the electric light bulb; William Wrigley Jr., George Eastman, who was responsible for bringing photography to the world, the man behind Kodak; Wilbur Wright, first flight; John D. Rockefeller; Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone; Theodore Roosevelt, a US president; and F.W. Woolworth, who was a major retailer. The full list leads like a who's who in the early part of the 20th century. So what traits in common did all of these remarkable people possess that contributed to each of their successes? Well, the full answer to that can be seen in Napoleon Hill's book. It's a bestseller called Think and Grow Rich, which incidentally has very little to do with riches. Such was the success and reverence enjoyed by this book that it became and remains the foundation of the worldwide self-help industry. For the purposes of this course, and in particular this session, the most significant trait that each of them disclosed was a belief in the existence of a higher level superconscious mind, a sixth sense if you like. That is, acceptance of the existence of a higher self, a source of intelligent inspiration and communication beyond the constraints of our current traditional thinking. This may, at first hearing, sound incredulous and fanciful, but please bear with this. The world's greatest thinkers and most creative people have acknowledged the infinite power and wonder of the superconscious mind. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the philosopher and poet, called it the oversoul, saying, "We lie in the lap of an immense intelligence that answers our every need," saying that when we receive insights from this source, we recognize them as coming from a place far beyond and outside of ourselves and our own limited minds. Napoleon Hill referred to it as the infinite intelligence, the universal storehouse of all imagination and creativity. He proposed that the ability to access this storehouse was the significant trait that contributed to the success of the hundreds of people that he had interviewed through his years of research. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, rival of the famous Sigmund Freud, called it the supraconscious mind, declaring that it contained all the wisdom of the human race, past, present and future. Whatever it's called, it provides the potential for limitless accomplishment. Here are some famous examples of the practical use of the superconscious as the source of truly original creativity in man. Ralph Waldo Emerson confessed that his best works seemed to flow through him, as if writing themselves. His work remains amongst the most beautiful and inspirational in the English language. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart could see and hear the music appear in his mind and was able to write it down note perfect first time. Many of the famous composers, including Beethoven, Bach and Brahms, access the superconscious mind when composing their greatest pieces that have since become timeless. Thomas Edison, who was responsible for over 1,000 patented inventions, including the electric light bulb and the first phonograph, machine, which was a machine to record sound for the youngsters among you. Thomas Edison regularly tapped into his superconscious mind for the solutions that would lead him to successful inventions. Michael Faraday was never trained as a scientist. In fact, he started life as an assistant to a bookbinder. Yet what he did have was a voracious appetite for knowledge, and he made a point of reading the books that he bound. One night, he woke up with his mind overwhelmed with scientific formulas, unaware of what they meant or their significance, that he was being fed. He wrote pages of scientific formula down and the calculations down on paper. The notes were later examined by a reputed scientist, and it was discovered that the work that he'd written down was based on knowledge that had never existed before, and he certainly had no way of referencing it anywhere. The work was to form the basis of the entire electronic age that we now enjoy. Nikola Tesla, considered the greatest electrical genius of his age, constructed electrical motors piece by piece in his mind, and was able to take them apart in his mind and reassemble them until they could work perfectly. He could then go into the workshop and build a perfectly working electrical motor or machine that worked first time. Tesla was attributed with the honour of having produced the first electric motor that the world has seen. The man often acknowledged as the greatest thinker of the last century was Albert Einstein. Einstein was a firm believer in the superconscious mind, the infinite intelligence source that we're referring to. The man who created and introduced motor cars to the world was Henry Ford. And he subscribed to the belief that much of his success came from his faith in this all-embracing superconsciousness. In 1928, Henry Ford was asked in an interview about what drove his success, and here's how he responded. Somewhere is a mastermind sending brainwave messages to us all. There is a great spirit. I never did anything by my own volition. I was pushed by an invisible force within and outside of me. Across the world, enlightened scientists, eminent philosophers, religious and spiritual wise men and women are acknowledging the presence of a sixth sense, an infinite world of intelligence and energy beyond that contained in our individual minds. Some books or metaphysics gurus sum everything up as the unconscious mind. The term superconscious mind is widely used by Brian Tracy, a top-selling self-help guru, and I prefer to use this description, superconscious mind. What's important is what it can do for you. There is only one superconscious mind, the universal mind, if you like, to which all of our minds are connected and have access. But we just have to open our minds and faith to believe in it. Our ability to connect with this superconscious mind is largely dependent upon our willingness to accept and open up to its existence. If we reject it in our mind will remain closed to it and will never have access. So we have to at least give it consideration. It helps you to make decisions, since it has infinite intelligence. It has all the answers that you might want to every question imaginable. It's the source of all true invention and real invention and creativity. Great inventors like Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein mastered the techniques of receiving great ideas from the superconscious mind. Where else could they have got these innovative ideas from that hadn't previously existed before? It helps you to achieve your goals. This is the function covered in a later session, in the session on goals. The superconscious mind is like a mega computer that orchestrates the activities in every little computer connected to it. By impressing your goal upon your subconscious mind, your superconscious responds accordingly. The energy vibrations you create ensure that the right people will start appearing in your life. Opportunities will come and lessons will be provided to strengthen you if necessary. everything will be set in motion to help you achieve your desire. Once you truly understand the concept of the superconscious mind power, you will realize that success is no longer a matter of luck. The proper mental approach. Your superconscious mind operates most effectively when you apply a mental attitude of faith and acceptance. Confidently expecting that your problems will be solved, obstacles removed, and your goals achieved is the mental approach that intensifies the rate of energy vibration of your thought and causes your superconscious mind to function at its optimum level for you. It's only when you are completely relaxed about the intended outcome of a given situation that matters will begin to resolve themselves. Expect the unexpected. The outcome, however, will always be everything that you ask for, and sometimes it will exceed your expectations. Strangely though, it seems that the simpler the instructions you give it, and the harder you don't try, the more effectively your superconscious mind works in bringing you the things that you desire. Faith plays an important part. And I don't mean religious faith, I mean belief that something is going to work. Napoleon Hill called faith the chemist of the mind. When faith is blended with thought, the subconscious mind receives the vibration, transforming it into its spiritual equivalent, and transmits it to the infinite intelligence of the superconscious mind. When faith, love, desire and thoughts are directed towards the superconscious mind, they are the most powerful combination known to man. With faith in the process and in the ultimate power of the mind, mixed with love and directed thought, anything is possible. Without faith, we're at the mercy of weakened desire and misdirected thought. All great men and women develop the almost childlike ability to entrust themselves to the goodness of the universe, with the simple faith that everything will unfold as it should in its own time. They have an attitude of calmness and confidence, and a belief that there is a power greater than themselves that is helping them. All strains of negativity, anger, worry or impatience shuts down your superconscious mind, diminishing your powers. It confuses the messages that you're sending from your conscious to your subconscious mind. Destructive emotions of any kind interfere with the calm, positive attitude your superconscious requires for optimal functioning. The relationship between the conscious, subconscious and superconscious mind looks something like this. Your conscious mind is connected to your subconscious mind, which in turn is connected to the superconscious mind. From the diagram you can see that the conscious mind is not connected directly to the superconscious mind. We rely on our subconscious mind to send and receive information to and from the superconscious, infinite intelligence and energy source. So, having heard all about the conscious mind, the subconscious mind and the superconscious mind, what did you make of what you heard, of what we talked about with the superconscious universal mind? A source of all innovation and information that is available to mankind if only he knew how to access it. My first exposure to the concept was over 20 years ago in Napoleon Hill's book Think and Grow Rich, where he'd been commissioned by Andrew Carnegie to interview those successful people. Each of those people that Napoleon Hill interviewed, as we've said, attributed their success to their belief in the existence of a higher level superconscious mind, a sixth sense, which assisted them in their endeavours. As a somewhat cynical former emergency services officer, I was not persuaded by one publication. However respected the author and contributors might be, I found that the respected names in the self-help and human potential world unanimously supported the existence of the universal mind, more by faith than on any scientific basis. So I explored the respected scientific authorities in neuroscience and found that the early days skepticism was rapidly being countered by arguments in favour of the existence of an external consciousness. There are too many to name, but Dr. Peter Fenwick, a highly regarded neuropsychiatrist studying the human brain, is an advocate for the universal brain, the universal mind, providing substantial evidence from his extensive research that consciousness exists even after death of a patient and their mind. In fact, Fenwick believes that consciousness actually exists independently and outside of the brain as an inherent property of the universe itself, like dark matter and dark energy or gravity, and that seems to mirror what we've been talking about with the superconscious mind. Traditionally, scientists have tried to define the mind as the product of brain activity. The brain is the physical substance and the mind is the conscious product of those firing neurons, according to the classic argument. Growing scientific evidence shows that the mind goes far beyond the physical workings of your brain. Scientist Dan Siegel, a professor of psychiatry at UCLA University and School of Medicine, conducted an extensive piece of work with 40 scientists across disciplines, including neuroscientists, physicists, sociologists, and anthropologists. The most immediately shocking element of their findings is that our mind extends beyond our physical selves. In other words, our mind is not simply our perception of experiences, but those experiences themselves. The detail of the superconscious universal mind presented in this session are put to you asking that you might keep an open mind about its existence. If all the claims are accurate, and it does exist, it provides opportunity for limitless accomplishment, as indicated by Carl Jung. You are the architect of your own destiny, the driver on your own journey in this life. The work across these sessions is one source of fuel and navigation, and how you accept and use the information, if at all, and how it develops is of course up to you. Now we'll talk about something called defragmentation, defragmenting your mind, with an image on screen. Fragmentation is the process or state of breaking or being broken into fragments. Defragmenting is to reduce the fragmentation of a file by concatenating or linking parts stored in separate locations on a disk. So, in computer terms, it means condensing all the data together so that it runs contiguously, taking up less space and more efficiently. In terms of the way it stores and recalls information, the human mind is often compared to the hard disk of a computer. If the brain is the hardware, then the mind is the intelligent software. In the world of the computer, when programs and files are added to the hard drive of a computer, files become fragmented when the data is written to the disk, and there's not enough contiguous space to hold the complete file. So storage algorithms on the computer break the data apart into chunks so that it will fit into the available spaces on the drive. You may even be familiar with defragging your own computer to improve its performance, or defragmenting as it's called properly. Defragmentation moves the data blocks on the hard drive around to bring all of the parts of the file together. Defragmentation reduces the system fragmentation, increasing the efficiency of data retrieval and thereby improving the overall performance of the computer. At the same time, it cleans the storage and provides additional storage capacity. Similarly, in the brain, our brain stores every piece of sensory data we receive in what we see, hear, feel, taste, smell and experience, forming memories. From birth, our mental hard drive of memories start with full capacity, an empty page if you like, ready to start accumulating all the life experiences and sensory input. Everything we see, smell, feel, hear or touch starts to occupy our memory bank, starts to fill those little squares of storage in our brain. We get loads of fragmented data because of all the sensory inputs the brain receives every second, and because of the massive shifts in emotions that we feel on a daily basis. This makes your brain feel full, overwhelmed at times, slows your processing and recall speed. In computing, the defragmentation process increases the efficiency and retrieval of files and data. In the world of the human mind, with all of our ideas, decisions, emotions and responsibilities, we can also defrag and improve our efficiency of recall of all the sensory information that we've stored. Your mind, the human software, the capacity to remember the past is an integral part of human existence. Without it, you would not be able to drive to work, hold a meaningful conversation with your family, read a book or prepare a meal. Understanding what memory is and how it works is a fundamental goal of modern neuroscience. Many thousands of years before the advent of computers, the philosopher Plato famously compared our memory to one of its predecessors, a wax tablet that is blank at birth and slowly takes on the impression of the events from our life. Only in the past 100 years have psychologists developed techniques to study our recollections of the past. What is clear is that the human memory is a lot more complicated than Plato had ever imagined. The human brain and the mind within it are the most complicated yet incredible objects in the known universe. How the brain and mind function together is a fascinating area of neuroscience, filling many books on the subject. In nearly all adults, the language centre of the brain resides in the left hemisphere, but in children the brain is less specialised. Until babies become about a year old, they respond to language with their entire brains, but then gradually language shifts to the left hemisphere, driven by the acquisition of language itself when they learn to speak and understand what's being spoken to them. When examining the adolescent brain, we find mystery, complexity, frustration and inspiration as the brain begins teeming with hormones. The prefrontal cortex, the centre of reasoning and impulse control, is still a work in progress. For the first time, scientists can offer an explanation for what parents already know. Adolescence is a time of churning emotions and poor judgment. Why do teenagers have distinct needs and behaviours? Why, for example, do school students have such a hard time waking up in the morning? Scientists have just begun to answer these questions about the purpose of sleep as it relates to the sleep patterns of teenagers. The latest discoveries in neuroscience present a new view of how the brain ages. Overturning decades of dogma, scientists recently discovered that even into our 70s, our brains continue producing new neurons. Scientists no longer hold the long-standing belief that we lose vast numbers of brain cells as we grow older. The normal aging process leaves most mental functions intact and may even provide the brain with unique advantages that form the basis for wisdom. The aging brain is also far more resilient than it was previously believed. A common question is, can the brain run out of storage space? As the storage cells of our mind fill up, it's not uncommon to experience mental overwhelm. We talked about this a few minutes ago. Until sleep and rest perform the miracle of defragmentation. This explains how confusion becomes clarity as our brains sort and resort the experiences and memories that we collect. The good news is that there seems to be no limit to the knowledge that we can fit into a brain. As far as scientists have discovered, no one has ever run out of storage space. However, whilst brain cells do not wither, cognitive skills do slow down when a brain is so full that it takes longer to recall and sift through like an overused computer hard drive. When you've got too much information and too many applications on your computer, its performance slows down. This is the brain in exactly the same way. Your brain is the hardware, your mind is the software, life is the printout. Let's look at the brain and mind image again. We've seen many images and photographs of the brain in the earlier session. The brain is the engine of grey matter, and how remarkable it is. What cannot be illustrated is the mind in action. In layman's terms, then, what is the difference between your brain and your mind? The brain is an organ, but the mind isn't. The brain is the physical place where the mind resides. It's a vessel in which the electronic impulses that create thought are contained. With the brain, you coordinate your moves, your organism, your activities, and transmit impulses. But you use the mind to think. You can muse at what happened, what's scheduled, and what may be or will happen. And the mind is the manifestations of thought, reception, emotion, determination, memory, and imagination that all takes place within the brain. Mind is often used to refer especially to the thought processes of reason. The mind is the awareness of consciousness that we know, the ability to control what we do and know what we are doing and why. It's the ability to understand. The image of the brain filled with the cogwheels at the start and at the end of these video sessions was chosen deliberately because it seems to depict most accurately the shape of the brain, with the mind and the processes of thought represented by the whirring of those cogs within our brain. Animals are able to interpret their environments but not understand them, whereas humans are able to understand what happens around them, even if not the scientific reasoning and explanation for it. And therefore, we can adapt to the surroundings. The mind is the set of thinking faculties, including the cognitive aspects such as consciousness, imagination, perception, thinking, judgment, language and memory, as well as the non-cognitive aspects such as emotion. Under the scientific physicalist interpretation, the mind is housed, at least in part, in the brain. The nature of the relationship between the human mind and the body has been the subject of long-held speculation and curiosity. A common question is, where do thoughts occur then? Certainly your brain is a wonderful organ. However, some cognitive scientists argue that without the help of your body, your brain would be nowhere. We think big, we think out loud, we think outside the box, we think on our feet. But what we don't do is think entirely inside our heads. That sounds strange. Thoughts aren't confined to our brains. They course through a network that expands to our bodies, perhaps eliminating at times the need for complex thought. The notion that we think with the body, the startling conclusion of a field called embodied cognition, flies in the face of long-standing views on the subject. Early cognitive psychologists defined thought as an activity that resides in the brain. Sensory data comes in from the eyes and the ears, fingers and the funny bone, and the mind turns these signals into disembodied representations that it manipulates in what we call thinking. The body may collect sensory information like a computer collects information via its mouse and keyboard, but according to the traditional view of cognition, it's the brain that does the thinking. Numerous respected studies over the past few decades challenge that view, suggesting instead that our thoughts are inextricably linked to our physical experience. In one study, neuroscientists exposed volunteers to different colours. When they did, they found that getting a whiff of a fishy odour evoked feelings of suspicion. Likewise, when research participants were exposed to another person behaving suspiciously, they were better able to detect a fishy scent. The range of findings demonstrating embodied cognition is impressive. Here is a small sampling of them. Looking upward nudges people to call to mind others who are more powerful, while looking down prompts thoughts of people that we outrank. People judge a petition to be more consequential if it's handed to them on a heavy clipboard rather than a lightweight one. Cricketers with a high batting average perceive the ball as bigger than poorer hitters do. Botox injections preventing frowning also slow people's comprehension of sentences describing angry and sad events. On their surface, findings like these seem little more than mere fodder for amusing cocktail conversation. But some cognitive scientists argue the evidence actually points to something far deeper and more radical. It's not just that our bodies influence thought, it's that thought itself is a system that simultaneously takes place in the brain, the body, and the environment around us. In one study, researchers at the University of Virginia asked volunteers to estimate the steepness of a hill just by looking at it from the bottom of the hill. The volunteers' answers correlated with how physically suited they were to actually climbing the hill. They rated the hill as steeper when they wore a heavy backpack, and likewise, athletes amongst the group described the hill as less steep than volunteers who were unfit. Different bodies, different thoughts, you may ask. Such findings raise a mind-bending question. Do different bodies dictate different thoughts? In one study that confronts that idea, cognitive scientist Daniel Casasanto of the New School for Social Research in New York reasoned that if people use their physical perceptions and motor experiences to construct mental simulations, then physical characteristics that cause us to interact with the environment in systematically different ways should in fact send people down different mental pathways. To test the possibility, Casasanto and colleagues examined spatial preferences in left and right-handed people. He found that people prefer the choices presented to them on their dominant side, a phenomenon that supports what he calls the body specificity hypothesis, and that's a mouthful. When asked to select which job applicant to hire, which product to buy, or which alien creature seemed most trustworthy, the left-handed people tended to choose the selection that was on the left, and vice versa. In another experiment, Casasanto's team asked right-handed study participants to wear a bulky glove that nudged them to use their left hand instead whilst doing a motor task. The constraint actually changed their preferences. After completing a motor task with their left hand, people preferred choices presented on their left. Studies that demonstrate embodied cognition seem to defy conventional wisdom, which paints thought as a set of computer-like algorithms that unfold entirely within the skull. Consider a cricket fielder. This is a good example. Consider a cricket fielder who must run to catch a flying ball. How does he get to the right place at the right moment You could solve this problem with a calculator using maths and physics to calculate where and when the ball would reach the height necessary for catching, and then draw a straight line from the player's starting point to the position, and from the player's starting position to the spot where the ball is going to appear in his hand. But the player doesn't do the maths, and he doesn't run in a straight line necessarily. Instead, he keeps his eye on the ball and he moves in a path that synchronises with the ball's curved trajectory, the decelerating trajectory. As he runs, his motion cancels out some of the ball's motion, and now it looks to him as if the ball is moving in a straight line, which he then tracks to its endpoint in his hand. The fielder doesn't need to get out a calculator. He just needs to process the visual clues that he's getting along with the physical clues, like his running speed, and then put them together to solve the task and catch the ball. Yes, he uses his brain, but his eyes and his legs are just as crucial. You see, we're using the body, parts of the body here, as part of the process of thought. Clear evidence of embodied cognition is now voluminous. What to make of it? Well, that's more controversial. The view that thought depends crucially on bodily sensation and action has yet to overtake the traditional model of cognition. In part, that's because researchers lack a coherent theory that can explain how and under what circumstances embodied effects occur. Whilst conducting research into the brain, an interesting discovery is worth sharing. It's called negativity bias of the brain. And here's an image to display it. Have you ever found yourself dwelling on an insult or fixating on your mistakes? Criticisms often have a greater impact than compliments, and bad news frequently draws more attention than good. The reason for this is that negative events have a greater impact on our brains than positive ones. Psychologists refer to this as the negative bias, also called the negativity bias, and it can have a powerful effect on your behaviour, your decisions, and even your relationships. The negativity bias is the notion that even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative nature, for example unpleasant thoughts, emotions, or social interactions that are harmful or potentially traumatic, have a greater effect on one's psychological state and processes than neutral or positive things. In other words, something very positive will generally have less of an impact on a person's behaviour and cognition than something equally emotional but negative. The negativity bias has been investigated within many different domains, many different cultures, including the formation of impressions and general evaluations, attention, learning and memory, and decision making and risk considerations. The simplest example is how the loss of £20 feels so much more painful than the equivalent joy of finding £20. Apparently, this is now proven about the human brain, that the negative thoughts will be effectively double the positive ones. The individual ability to reverse the effect in our mind is down to our tendency towards positive or negative thinking and actions. If we receive a compliment from someone, then a criticism from someone else, the two don't neutralise each other. We feel twice as bad about the criticism as we feel good about the compliment. The criticism would definitely leave a stronger emotional mark. It's how well we cope with reversing the effect that counts. And this is done by positive action, like vocalising appreciation rather than mere positive thinking. So you see where other elements of the course sessions are starting to come to play now. You're using appreciation to help us to dismiss the negative bias in life. Apparently it's the way our brains were hardwired to expect negativity. The formation of a negative mental bias in the brain dates back to caveman days when we needed to be prepared for attack or threat. But these are out of date mental hang-ups obstructing our path to happiness that we're still carrying around with us centuries down the road, and only action like active appreciation can overturn it. This historic inherited anxiety goes back to Neanderthal man, and yet we still struggle with it today. How ridiculous is that? Understanding it when it crops up in our minds helps us to take a positive stance against it and take positive action like active appreciation to say, stuff your anxiety, you ain't spoiling my happy state. Dr. Sandy Mann, a recognised professional expert in the field of human psychology at the University of Central Lancashire, touched on this in a series of podcast sessions with myself in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic lockdown. Sandy described the process of identifying negative thoughts as they occur as thought and emotion catching. Once identified, the negative thought can be replaced by repetition with a stronger, more positive one, she said. And she was quite correct. The negative bias is our tendency not only to register negative stimuli more readily, but also to dwell on these events. Also known as positive-negative asymmetry. This negativity bias means that we feel the sting of a rebuke more powerfully than we feel the joy of praise. The psychological phenomenon explains why bad first impressions can be so difficult to overcome, and why past traumas can have such a long, lingering effect. In almost any interaction, we are more likely to notice negative things and later remember them more vividly. As humans, we tend to remember traumatic experiences better than positive ones. We tend to recall insults better than praise. We tend to react more strongly to negative stimuli. And we tend to think about negative things more frequently than positive ones. We also tend to respond more strongly to negative events than to equally positive ones. For example, you might be having a great day at work when a colleague makes an offhand, thoughtless comment that you find irritating. You then find yourself stewing over their words for the rest of the day. When you get home from work and someone asks you how your day went, you reply that it was terrible, even though it was overall quite good, despite that one negative incident with that thoughtless person. What the research says is that across a wide array of psychological events, people tend to focus more on the negative as they try to make sense of the world. We pay more attention to negative events than to positive ones. We tend to learn more from negative outcomes and experiences. We even tend to make decisions based on negative information more than we do on positive data. It's often said that in business, for example, we tend to learn more from our mistakes, which is a negative thing, than our successes, which is a positive thing. We tend to more or less put the successes behind us and harbour on the mistakes that we've made. It's the bad things that grab our attention and stick to our memories, and in many cases influence the decisions that we make. Motivation. Psychological research suggests that the negative bias influences motivation to complete a task. People have less motivation when an incentive is framed as a means to gain something than when the same incentive will help them avoid the loss of something. This can play a role in your motivation to pursue a goal. Rather than focusing on what you will gain, if you keep working towards something, you're more likely to dwell on what you might have to give up in order to achieve that goal. bad news. Additionally, studies have shown that negative news is more likely to be perceived as truthful, since negative information draws greater attention. It also may be seen as having greater validity. This might be why bad news seems to garner more attention. In politics, differences in negativity bias have also been linked to political ideology. Some research suggests that conservatives may have stronger psychological responses to negative information than liberals. Some evidence, for example, has found that people who consider themselves politically conservative are more likely to rate ambiguous stimuli as threatening. Such differences in the negativity bias might explain why some people are more likely to value things such as tradition and security, whilst others are more open to embracing ambiguity and change and risk. So let's look at some examples of the negativity bias. The negativity bias can have a variety of real-world effects on how people think and act. Do any of these situations and events seem familiar to you? You receive a performance review at work, which was quite positive overall, and noted your strong performance and achievements, but there were a few constructive comments pointing out areas where you could improve, and you find yourself fixating on those remarks. Rather than feeling good about the positive aspects of your review, you feel upset and angry about the critical ones. Here's another example. After an argument with your partner, your significant other, you find yourself focusing on all of your partner's flaws instead of acknowledging their good points. You ruminate over all their imperfections. Even the most trivial of faults are amplified, whilst their positive characteristics are overlooked. Familiar? Here's another one. You still vividly recall humiliating yourself in front of your friends, even though the event happened years ago. You find yourself cringing with embarrassment over it when you think about it, even though your friends have forgotten about it and never mention it again. The evidence then. Our tendency is to pay more attention to bad things and overlook good things, and it's likely a result of evolution. Earlier in human history, paying attention to bad, dangerous and negative threats in the world was literally a matter of life and death. It was a matter of necessity. Those who were more attuned to danger and who paid more attention to the bad things around them were more likely to survive. This meant that they were also more likely to hand down the genes that made them more attentive to danger. So we've had it passed down to us through the generations to be more negatively biased. Development. Research suggests that this negativity bias starts to emerge in infancy. Very young infants tend to pay greater attention to positive facial expressions and tone of voice, but this begins to shift as they near to 1 year of age. Brain studies indicate that around this time, babies begin to experience greater brain responses to negative stimuli. This suggests that the brain's negative bias emerges during the latter half of a child's first year of life. There is some evidence that the bias may actually start even earlier in development. One study found that infants as young as 3 months old show signs of the negativity bias when making social evaluations of others, of other children. The brain's response. Neuroscientific evidence has shown that there is a greater neural processing in the brain in response to negative stimuli. Studies that involve measuring event-related brain potentials, known as ERPS, which show the brain's response to specific sensory, cognitive or motor stimuli, have shown that negative stimuli elicit a larger brain response than positive ones. In studies conducted by psychologist John Cacioppo, participants were shown pictures of either positive, negative or neutral images. The researchers then observed electrical activity in the brain in response to those images. Negative images produced a much stronger response in the cerebral cortex than did positive or neutral images. The effects. Whilst we may no longer need to be on constant high alert as our early ancestors needed to be in order to survive, the negativity bias still has a starring role in how our brains and minds operate. Research has shown that the negativity bias can have a wide variety of effects on how people think, respond and feel. Some of the everyday areas where you might feel the results of this bias are included in your relationships, your decision making and the way that you perceive people. Negativity bias in relationships then. The negativity bias can have a profound effect on your relationships. The bias might lead people to expect the worst of others, particularly in close relationships in which people have known each other for a long time. For example, you might negatively anticipate how your partner will react to something and go into the interaction with your defences already on high alert. Arguments and resentment are often the result in these instances. When it comes to relationships, it's valuable to remember that negative comments usually carry much more weight than positive ones. Being aware of our own tendency to fixate on the negative is also important. By understanding this natural human tendency, you can focus on finding ways to cut other people a break and to stop expecting the worst. Decision making. The negativity bias can have an influence on the decision making process. In their famous work, Nobel Prize winning researchers Kahneman and Tversky found that when making decisions, people consistently place greater weight on the negative aspects of an event than they might do on the positive ones. When imagining scenarios involving either gaining a certain amount of money or losing the same amount of money, the risk of loss tends to loom larger in the people's minds. People often fear the consequences of the negative outcome more than they desire the potential positive gains, even when the two possibilities are equivalent, as in the £20 example that I related to you earlier. People perception then. When forming impressions of others, people also tend to focus more on a negative information. For example, studies have shown that when given both good and bad adjectives to describe another person's character, participants give greater weight to the bad descriptions when forming a first impression. How to overcome the negative bias. The negativity bias can take a toll on your mental health. It can cause you to dwell on dark thoughts, hurt your relationships with loved ones, and make it difficult to maintain an optimistic outlook on life. Fortunately, there are steps that you can take to change your thinking. Some of the things that you can do include: stop negative self-talk. Start paying attention to the type of thoughts that run through your mind. After an event takes place, you might find yourself thinking things like, "I shouldn't have done that." The negative self-talk shapes how you think about yourself and others. Use positive self-talk for a better life. Reframe the situation. Remember the perception cycle from session 9? How you talk to yourself about events, circumstances and people and experiences plays a large role in shaping how you interpret the events. When you find yourself interpreting something in a negative way, or only focusing on the bad aspect of the situation, look for ways to reframe the events in a more positive light. This doesn't mean ignoring potential dangers or wearing rose-coloured spectacles. It simply means refocusing so that you can give fair and equal weight to good events. Establish new patterns. When you find yourself ruminating on things rather too much, Look for an uplifting activity to pull yourself out of the negative mire, out of the negative mindset. For example, if you find yourself mentally reviewing some unpleasant event or outcome, consciously try to redirect your attention elsewhere and engage in an activity that brings you joy. Listening to upbeat music, going for a walk, reading a good book are all ways to get your mind off negative thoughts. Savour the positive moments, because it takes more for positive experiences to be remembered. It's important to give extra attention to good things that happen to you, where negative things might be quickly transferred and stored in your long-term memory. You need to make more of an effort to get the same effect from the happy moments, the happy experiences, the happy memories. So when something great happens, take a moment to really focus on it. Replay the moment several times in your memory. Don't feel that it's being gratuitous. It's your moment, it's your experience. You can replay it in your mind as often as you will. And in doing so, focus on the wonderful feelings that the memory evokes. Concluding then on the negativity bias. The negativity bias can have a powerful impact on your behaviour, but being aware of it means that you can take steps to adopt a more positive outlook. Taking a more mindful approach that involves being aware of your own tendency toward negativity and consciously elevating happier thoughts to the forefront of your awareness. This is one of the best ways to combat the negative bias. Ruminating on the negative can take a serious toll, so taking steps to combat the bias can play a role in boosting your mental well-being. And please don't feel this is strange. Everybody suffers from the negativity bias. It's part of human nature, but it's being aware of it that enables us to do something about it. So, what's your state of mind? If you can consciously pay attention to and then deliberately shape what you think, this in turn will shape your moods. Here's where you seek out those shoulds and substitute wants, where you eliminate all that catastrophizing that can cause you to feel trapped, overwhelmed, victimized and just plain miserable. The aim is to keep yourself driving down the middle of the rational road rather than sliding off into an emotional ditch. Here are 6 of the most common states of mind. Rational. This is the gold standard, the middle of the road. The prefrontal lobes fully engaged in the brain. This is when you can use emotions as information, where you're able to maintain a reasonable and rounded perspective. You probably can stay there a good amount of the time at your job when your professional self is in charge, or when you're not feeling tired and stressed out. Anxious. We all know this one. It's when we wake up at 3 in the morning ruminating about what lies ahead, the meagre pittance in your bank account, or the way your partner could have perhaps maybe misinterpreted your last text or something that you said. It's about the future, the what ifs, disasters and butterflies in the stomach. That's anxiety. Depressed. If anxiety is about the future, depression is often about the past. Mistakes, regrets, roads not taken, for example. But for many of us, it's about feeling trapped, stuck at the bottom of a well with no way out, the soulless job, the wreck of a relationship, the sense that your life has no purpose, evidenced by thoughts like, it doesn't matter, why bother, it's never going to change. Angry. We plot revenge. We say over and over how unfair life is. This, in place of anxiety's butterflies, is a raging volcano. The fire is burning and spewing and we want to do something about it. Fear. Everyday fear is easily activated and more often than not has little or no basis in reality. Remember, fear, the initials are FEAR, which stands for false expectations appearing real. Here is where you feel intimidated by someone, even though in your rational mind you realise there's no sane reason to. We withdraw, we feel insecure and small, or we walk on eggshells around the person and get as a way of appeasing the other and avoiding confrontation. It's about triggers that open up childhood wounds. Rebellious. Like fear, there's usually a little kid element to this as well. It's not the heat of anger, but more that you can't make me, I don't wanna type response. There's resentment and a bit of passive aggressiveness or simple digging in of heels. There are undoubtedly others that you personally find disabling or distressing for you, or that you would label differently. The point is that we move in and out of these common states, these common mental states of mind, often throughout the day. The challenge is keeping yourself from sliding into one of the emotional ditches that we mentioned, or if you do, quickly pulling yourself up, getting back on the rational road. And here is suggestions for you. 1, track your state. Just ask yourself every hour or so, how am I doing? On a scale of 1 to 10, from happy to crummy, how's my mood? 2, label it. When you start to creep up to 4 or 5, you want to ask yourself, what exactly is taking over? Getting irritable, down in the dumps, worried, rebellious and unruly, feeling a bit intimidated and vulnerable. 3, cool and rebalance. If emotions are ramping up, you may need to put out some of the fire of the emotion before moving forward. So if you're angry, go exercise or write down how you feel, or punch a pillow. If you're anxious, do some deep breathing. 4, identify a problem. Cooling off doesn't get to the root of the emotion. What you want to do next is ask yourself, is there something I need to fix? A problem creating these negative emotions that I keep experiencing? Yes, you say, I'm worried my boss thinks I'm slacking. I still haven't heard back from my girlfriend or my boyfriend, and I'm angry that they're being so inconsiderate. My husband or my wife triggers that little kid feeling of intimidation when they start wagging their finger at me and lecturing me. Rather than letting your emotions pull you down, bringing your 4 or 5 to a quick 9 or 10. Instead, bring your rational mind online and use your emotions as information to tell you what is precisely bothering you. Sometimes the problem is bogus, triggered by overwhelm, stress, lack of sleep, etc. Here's where you're having a bad body image day, or where you beat yourself up again about the way you handled the breakup with your last partner, while on a good day you know that such thinking is mental BS. And I think you know what the BS stands for. Make a mental or real list of those rubbish bin problems, the place where your head tends to go that lets you know that you're stressed out, tired, hungry, etc. Recognizing them as red flags of stress can help you avoid going down those rabbit holes of negative thoughts. 5, solve the problem. Once your mind has started to cool and rebalance, once you've identified the underlying problem, it's time to plan action to put the problem and the emotion to rest. Send an email to your supervisor, or arrange a face-to-face to get honest feedback about your performance, rather than continue to steam, call the partner, and not to rant and spray your anger, but to explain how you feel, and send them an assertive adult text. Tell your partner or your husband or your wife how their body posture can feel intimidating sometimes, and work out a plan together to manage discussions when they become heated. Get some sleep to reboot your system rather than obsessing about your weight. The key here is doing, moving forward rather than wallowing in self-pity. The more you do this tracking, labelling and solving, the more you notice what's going on inside your head and in your body, the more quickly you become at catching these shifts in your mindset and setting them straight. Staying out of the emotional ditch, like the real ones, is all a matter of practice. That brings this session on the power of your mind to a close. Coming up in the next session, the power of energy. Realising the importance of the role that energy plays in attracting more happiness into your life. Through examples, you'll learn how thought energy is scientifically recognised the world over as a powerful means of attracting more of the happiness that you want. Thank you.